Carlene, I've put your presentation up on the screen. I
Okay.
believe you should be able to see it, and you can click when you are ready to present through it. But if you would like me at any time to do that for you, just let me know. Does that work for you?
Sure. Should I do a test click or does that mess it all up?
You can do a test click if you'd like.
Okay. Yeah, I might just use my arrow buttons. That's kind of nice.
Okay.
Okay.
So folks, we're just 1 minute from start. We do wait until 10 to allow as many people as possible to join us before things get started, but we will be starting momentarily. And welcome and thank you for joining us this morning.
Sarah, you gonna tell me when I'm supposed to start?
I will, yes.
Okay, that's good.
Okay, welcome and thank you for joining us this morning, everyone. This is the final online community of practice session for literacy and basic skills for the 2016-17 year. And we welcome you and we thank this morning Dr. Carlene Pendleton. I'm sorry if I pronounce it badly,
Okay,
Carlene
don't worry.
Jimenez, for joining us to provide us with some insights on dealing with the LGBTQ topic and with learners and the community that we serve. So I would like to turn over this morning's presentation to Carlene, and I welcome you. Go ahead, please, Carlene.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. I'd like to welcome everybody as well and just to thank you for participating in this. I have to say that working on homophobia and sexuality and gender and transphobia that's one of my favorite topics, and my other favorite topic is literacy. So this really brings together what I'm most interested in working on, as a professor and as a writer. So I welcome you all. Let me show you a picture. Let me show you some pictures of my growing up. There you go. Not many people get to see the middle picture, especially because at some point in time I had longer hair. For those of you around in the 80s, you might recognize that longer perm situation. And I had a pink sweater on. Well, you can't tell that. And that was my attempt at not being so boyish. The picture when I'm younger is mostly what I looked like growing up, just grubby little kid like everyone else. And for the most part, I guess you can't really see how I moved, but I moved like a boy. I looked like a boy, and I spent a lot of time with people questioning my gender, asking me, "Are you a boy or a girl?" And usually they knew. Sometimes they didn't, but usually they did, and they were teasing me. Though often, being a tomboy, I had a lot of good friends, and I had a lot of power at the school. But there was always this bit that you're not quite right, and so I tried to change that and um, tried. I never knew about gay people. Um, I don't know if you did growing up, but where I grew up, I didn't know anyone that was gay, and in fact, um, the only way I knew that word was as an insult. And my brothers and I had two older brothers, we would just say fag all the time and stuff like that. And we just said things were gay. I don't know if you still hear that out in the world. I guess if you do, you could put a little hand up if people are still saying that stuff. The reason I tell you this is because I feel like sometimes when I do this education, people think that only certain people can work on homophobia in their teaching, and they must be queers or people really highly knowledgeable, and they have all this specialized information. And I think that prevents a lot of people from jumping in. And so I try to give this account of my childhood to make you understand that I didn't know anything about this stuff, and I turned out to be gay even. And I think the only way that we can learn is by feeling comfortable of asking any questions and knowing it's not expert knowledge. We're all learning this together. And today you have a real live lesbian on tap here, and you can ask me any question, and I won't think anything is dumb. Okay? That's the only way I'm going to get you to hopefully provide this in your work, if you're not already doing so.
May I jump in for a second? And I
Sure.
apologize for not having said earlier. In this morning's session, Carlene is going to put up a few polls, and we want you to know that poll responses are completely anonymous. So we have no idea if you participate in a poll what you have answered. So please do feel confident and do know that what you are responding is private. We'll only see that somebody has clicked, but we won't know who has clicked. Thanks, Carlene.
Yeah, sorry, I should have mentioned that as well. And I put this poll here because I thought, well, I've told you a little bit about my background, and I thought we should have the opportunity to see if who else we're talking to. So we have 22 attendees. Okay, so you're all over the map so far. Just give you a little bit more time.
Yeah, please feel free to click on your screen. All we see at our end is a percentage for each of the answers. That's all. Thank
Yeah,
you.
do they see the same poll right now?
Excuse me, they see the poll, and
Yeah.
when you feel you've gotten as many results as we're going to get, we can show the results. So again, all we're going to show is the percentages we see. That's all. Okay, Caroline, that's
That's
probably what you're
probably
going
what
to
we
get.
have. Yeah, and I didn't mean to put you all on the spot, but I thought it was helpful because if you're all identifying as gay, I might, speak differently than if I know it's a mixed group. So yeah, we have a couple of people that identify as being gay, bisexual, queer, and many people identifying as not being part of this identity. Okay, so what about this one? What about in your family? Do you have family members that identify with a queer identity or within the queer community? So many more people have family members. And I think that that's true. I mean, I find even in education, a lot of the people who do a really good job with this, with social justice work around sexuality or ability, it's a lot of you grew up with people you love nearby, and so you have a lot of knowledge and you have a lot of empathy. So that's probably a good sense, you think?
Yes, I'd
I
go
think
ahead.
that's probably good. Okay, let's try one more. Um, well, actually, I have one more after this. I'm tricking you. This is with friends. Yeah, okay. So within the friend group, almost everybody has somebody. Look at that. Okay. So that's important to know too. This topic is not something that's totally distant from you. You have a sense of how people are living their lives. Okay, 20 out of 24. Oh, yeah, and this is the most people responding to. Okay, and then finally, let's look at your students. What about students? Do you know? Are they out? Oh, yeah. So actually, yeah, a majority of you have students that identify as being some member of the queer community. That could be why you're on the line today. Because we have to figure out how to reach these students, right? Okay, that looks like most people have written in. All right, let's move into some information, some more information for you. And this is going to be, I believe these slides, these are going to be published afterwards. Is that correct, Sarah? I think
That's
it's correct.
correct, and all of
Yeah.
the resources that Carlene will be sharing will also be circulated and also posted, everyone, so do know that. Go ahead, Carlene.
So yeah, so don't worry about taking copious notes because you can look at these later. Basically, some of the bigger language, some of the broader language, and this is also the language in the Ontario Human Rights Code, which I'll cover a bit later, is sexual orientation is about who we desire, it's about who we want to be intimate with, who we love. And gender expression refers to the ways in which we kind of show our masculinity or femininity or some combination or something else. Whereas gender identity refers to how you feel, like whether you feel male or female or something in between or something beyond, or people are coming up with many different forms of gender identity. Like even one of the popular words lately is non-binary, where they're saying, I have a gender, but it's not part of this male-female uh, duality. It's something else. I should. I know this might seem obvious to a lot of people, but it really isn't, these distinctions. And when I did research with high school students and junior high students, I was going in to ask them about their gender, and they were students of all backgrounds, of all genders. And I would say something like, well, what does it mean to be a boy or a girl? Or, what happens if you're a girlish boy or a boyish girl? Are people allowed to be what they want to be, etc.? And, what often came up is I would say something about that, and then, like, this was in 2011, so you can imagine the timing. People would raise their hand and they'd say, okay, I know about this girl-boy thing. They'd say, if you like Justin Bieber, then you're gay. That would be the answer. And so I don't, you know what I mean? They collapse girl and boy to gayness, and they're they're not the same thing, but it is often perceived to be the same thing. So, a lot of times when they're telling kids, um, like when they're worried about boys playing with dolls, that's a gender expression, a boy playing with a doll. And some people will get afraid and say, oh, you can't do that. If I take the doll away, I'm going to protect that kid from being gay. So that doesn't work, by the way. Like, they're going to be gay or not, whether or not they get to play with the doll. They might be happier if they get to play with the doll, but in terms of their sexuality, it doesn't influence it. But people often think that one influences the other. I don't think that it does. I haven't seen any evidence of that. I do think that often boyish girls um, uh, maybe later do become lesbian. Not all the time, though. There's a lot of boyish girls that are not. And the same thing with feminine men. So sometimes, I mean, there is an overlap that I think is, fair to say. We do see that, but it's not a direct correlation. Okay, giving you a few pictures of some Canadian icons that are on this queer alphabet. They call it the queer alphabet because, we put up LGBT. Did we just do LGBT for the name of this? I don't know, LGBTQ awareness. But the alphabet is all of the letters that represent these identities. And in fact, the list builds every year because new identities come into being. And so I've got a bunch here, and I'm going to give you the best sense of definitions that I can. But that said, know that each individual person might use these words slightly differently. And, I'm 45 and I've been out for 25 years. And those entire 25 years, these words have been changing. So let's just try to give you the best shot we can in 2017 at what these words mean. But know that your best solution for figuring out how somebody identifies is to ask them how they identify. I have a lot of definitions, both on the PowerPoint and in my head. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you another poll, and I'd like you to just tick the ones that you want me to talk about.
And maybe I should add that because you can't provide multiple answers, if there's more than one you're interested in and someone else hasn't checked it, just add it in the comments if you're comfortable, and we'll try to, I know Carlene will take note of that. Thank you.
Okay, let me just note these down so that when I move on. Gay, trans X. Well, maybe I should just note which ones I'm not doing. Let me see. Okay.
And we also have basically seen a request for all of the definitions, Carlene, so it's
well, except I think they got lesbian down. Lesbian and bi.
okay. But we've had a text that's requesting all
that's
of them.
requesting. Oh, okay.
So
all right. So we're just going to do it? Okay, we can do it. All right. Let's go through. Okay, lesbian, a woman who forms sexual and loving relationships with another woman. I would say Ellen DeGeneres has highly popularized this identity. I don't know what else to say about that word other than there are plenty of women who love other women who don't necessarily use that word. It came, it's been very popular in the, from the 70s and 80s. At one point, I know a lot of women of color said, well, that's not necessarily the word that I would use, and saw it more as a white term, but not all the time. It depends. It was created because one of the reasons it was created was because when you just called something gay, often women felt that the men would dominate the space or the power of whatever that forum was. So they really wanted to recognize women, and this was a way of recognizing women's voices and identities within that. Gay is, the first definition is between two men, like the love and intimacy and sex that happens between two men. That said, sometimes people of all different identities in the queer spectrum will use the term gay because it's probably, for a lot of people it's kind of a mild word. So, I know a lot of lesbians that would even use the term gay because they feel like it's the least upsetting to people in a way. So it's an interesting word. It's, specific to men, and yet people use it more broadly. Bisexual, somebody who loves men and women. I should say that a new popular word is pansexual, because Some people want to say, well, I love men, women, I love trans people, I love people who don't identify with particular gender. So there's that as well. Um, yeah, I don't know what else to say about it other than you could be a man or a woman or a trans person and identify with this term. I feel like within the history of the politics of the of queer identities, say in the 80s and 90s, people were really fighting to get the word bisexual recognized, and often bisexuals have felt excluded by lesbian and gay resources because their word wasn't there, and they felt that it was almost like you know um, people would rather you choose whether you were going to be gay or straight and not be open to multiple sexualities or multiple like men or women or trans people. But I don't know why that is. I think people should be allowed to desire who they desire. Transgender. So transgender is an umbrella term for people of all different trans backgrounds. Um, when I say an umbrella term, it could mean somebody who likes to cross-dress, like if they identify as a boy but they like to wear girls' clothing. Or it could be someone who on their birth certificate the doctor said they were a girl, but they feel strongly that they are a boy, or a girl, a woman feels strongly, or somebody who's now an adult feels strongly that they are not the sex that they were on their birth certificate, and they want to get medical procedures, take hormones to change their body. It could be a full range. It could be people who identify as tomboys, maybe like masculine women. So it can be, it's an umbrella term for uh, non-conforming gender, where uh, you're not like, the stereotype of woman femininity, men masculinity. You're doing something different. You're crossing those or expanding those. Queer. Queer is a very contentious term, I would say, and I'm going to use it a lot because I like it and it's easy to use. But it is contentious because a lot of people growing up, and probably still today, were called queer, and it was said in a negative way. It's a tricky word, I think, for non-queers to use because you don't know how it's going to be perceived when it comes out of your mouth. They might not know that you have the great political version of the word. They might think you're using it as an insult. So it's a tricky word. But I kind of like it because it was a word, say like black in the civil rights movement, that was reclaimed, right? Like black was a word that was supposed to be bad, that was supposed to hurt African Americans. And they said, oh, you know what, we think black is beautiful, we're reclaiming it, and we're going to put it on our banners to say, black is important, black is beautiful, it's meaningful, it's worth something. It's kind of what happened with queer. They said, okay, we're going to take your insult and we're going to claim it and love it and make our banners with it. So it has that political charge, and it's also, when you're doing something like LGBT Awareness Day, it makes it easier to talk because it's hard to say LGBTQI2S in every sentence you use. You know what I mean? Anyway, so, like I said, people have all different ranges of feelings about that word. Intersex. So intersex is a term that means that your body has some combination of male and female anatomy. And you were born that way, and as you grow up, it manifests in different ways. And people think that this is really unusual, but from what I've read, it's like 1 in 35. So I don't know, like the stats that I've read say it's as common as red hair. So a lot of people are out there who are intersex. but you don't usually know it, right? Because these are pretty personal parts of people's bodies. And we've there's been a lot of intersex activism in recent decades, mostly because, well, it's not only acknowledgement and of intersex bodies as existing and being a natural part of humanity, but also because our culture, Western culture, is so obsessed with somebody being male or female and nothing in between. These little kids and these babies that are born this way and have no power to protect themselves, for many years, I don't know if it's stopped, I hope it's stopped, but I know it was a big practice in Toronto. They were literally like cutting their bodies. Um, like, if they decided the baby was born and their penis was too small, they would say, okay, well, it's too small. They would take out the ruler, see how many centimeters. If you can imagine, I mean, little babies' genitalia is so small to begin with. And they would, like, cut it off. They'd say, okay, it's better that that kid grows as a girl. And they tended to do that because it's easier to cut off, right, than to add. And often these kids wouldn't know till they were adults that somebody had done that to them. I met one other professor actually who was intersex, and when she was a young kid, they decided that her clitoris was too big, and the doctor had cut it off, which made her unable to have orgasms. For what? Like so that your genitalia looks like everybody else's. I mean, genitalia is so odd anyway, and mostly people don't see it. So I don't know. It's a really I think it's a really sad situation, in the way that a lot of intersex kids are treated. But I think that the political momentum has helped to protect them. Two-spirited. So two-spirited is an umbrella term. Um, as well. It can encompass many of these different identities we're talking about, but it's specific to Indigenous North Americans, and it was created by Indigenous people in North America because they didn't necessarily like the categorizing that we do in Western culture. So, and they wanted a word for themselves, and so it could, when you hear two-spirited, it could be about sexuality, or it could be about gender, or it could be about some combination of that. I guess what's important is it's like a name that Indigenous people came up with that they are claiming, and that recognizes maybe a blending of gender and sexuality in a way that maybe Western culture doesn't have exactly. So I think it's also important because if you look at early journals in the Americas, a lot of Europeans wrote about the fact that, like, uh, trans kinds of people, gay kinds of people within indigenous groups were fine, were okay, were part of the culture, and that was okay. And um, the indigenous people were actually taught by colonizers to hurt these people and to not be okay with that. So that's been 500 years in the making. And so a lot of Two-Spirit are trying to reclaim that position. So heterosexism, I think heterosexism is important because, it's not all the time. Often we think, okay, only if you hear somebody calling somebody else a fag, you go, okay, well, there must be bad homophobia and we have to take care of it because we heard it and we can, like, very explicitly hear that it's wrong. That's true. That happens. That happens all the time. But heterosexism is something else, and it's not the explicit hateful language. It's a system that doesn't really include uh, non-heterosexuals. So, I'll give you an example. And one time I was in class as a student, I was taking Spanish, and the teacher said, uh, she was just helping me with my Spanish, but she said, "Oh, can you describe for me your ideal man?" And there was the implication that as a woman, I would like men. So that's heterosexist. She didn't say you're a lesbian, you're gay, you're horrible, nothing like that. But she created a very uncomfortable situation for me because, in fact, a lot of the people in the class knew I was gay. I knew she wasn't trying to hurt me, but the system, the idea, the taken for granted thing where you just assume people are straight, makes us feel like we don't have a place there. And you hear it all the time. You hear it with even with little kids where they say, "Oh, you're going to get a little boyfriend when you grow up." Well, maybe, maybe not, right? But it's the kind of ongoing comments and assumptions that you should be heterosexual, and I think often without intending to make people feel excluded. And I think that that's an important one because I know even if you're signed up for this, that you want to um, make queer people feel included, and you might be doing things that you're unaware of. So that word helps you to be more aware of that. Homophobia, that's the more explicit, fear or hatred of lesbian, gay people, other queer people, bi people, and the prejudice, discrimination, harassment, acts of violence that can come with it. So transphobia, I think transphobia and homophobia, they're different, but they often overlap. And transphobia is when people feel this fear or hostility towards people who are not exhibiting their gender, are not following gender norms. And often that is the way people are targeted with homophobia. So if you're walking down the street and like I look really masculine, I've had people yell things at me, um, and I know that they are yelling homophobic things at me on the basis that I look like a masculine woman. So if you can see what I mean, um, it's they often go together because that's how people are targeted. And often people who do not identify as gay but who are feminine men or masculine women are targeted with transphobia. Okay, so what do these words look? Oh, shoot, you know what? I didn't have all the definitions there that I had as possibilities on the list. So before we go into what happens in schools, let me see if there's more that you wanted to hear about. You wanted to hear about genderqueer and non-binary. I think I said a bit about non-binary. There are a lot of people, especially young people, who are identifying with the term non-binary, and that means they don't want to identify with the idea of being a male or a female. They want to either just not have a focus on gender or maybe say that there's something in between or something beyond. Genderqueer, I would say, is fairly similar to non-binary. I would ask each individual their distinction, but just in my gut, I would say genderqueer, maybe they are more attracted to, feeling masculine or feminine or male or female, but maybe they're doing it in a different way or, like they're not wanting to drop those masculine and feminine ideas. You know what I mean? Like they might still embrace those, but maybe they're embracing them in a way that doesn't follow norms. Cisgender is also an important one, and that is basically they thought, well, it shouldn't just be queers that get an identity. We should give the other people an identity as well. Although, like, there are a lot of queers that fit into this category as well. And basically, that's like if you're a woman and you're feminine, or if you're a man and you're masculine. So, kind of the gender norms is what cisgender is. Gender creative children, this is said in a few ways. Gender creative children, gender independent children, uh, gender non-conforming children. Um, this means that, basically, like the trans um, definitions above, it's kids that, on their birth certificate, maybe it says that they're male, but they feel that they're female, or they want to be a very feminine male, or, vice versa, or, any combination thereof. And this, I think, is really important terms to know about, because I would say in the last 5 years, this has become a big movement in North America and around the world, where many kids and many parents are advocating for their kids that they should be able to go to school and um, identify with the pronouns they want, identify with the names they want, wear the clothes that they want, even though they're not conforming with gender norms, and that the school should respect that and support their kids. And I would say that politics and activism in this category has changed dramatically, and I think in really positive ways. So those are all the definitions. Have I missed any? Do you want to put any in the chat if there's anything else you want me to follow up on?
Carlene, there were a couple of great points in the chat. I don't know if you've been able to have a look, but there was a point from Cassie that again, sexual behavior is different than sexual orientation, and that I think begins to affect everyone's thinking and what definitions they settle on. We also had a question about Kim posed the question, we have a learner who has decided to identify as androgynous. What can you tell us about that term?
Sure, and I'm just saying these things that people couldn't select more than one. I was hoping they could select more than one. I guess that was from a while back. I'm sorry about that. I wanted you to be able to select more than one. The identity of androgynous. I think androgynous, and I've also heard lately the word neutral. People are identifying as neutral, which I think is similar. I think it relates to this kind of non-binary position that a lot of young people are using. And I think it's, kind of opting out of that male-female duality that they want to identify as something else entirely. Along with this, I think it's probably helpful, and you've probably heard this out there, that these words are following with pronouns. It's been in the news as well. And it's becoming more and more a practice in schools and universities to maybe do a go-around at the opening of the class and ask people what pronouns they identify with. So I know a lot of non-binary androgynous people that want to use the pronoun they, but it could be other pronouns as well. So I would highly recommend that you ask them their pronouns and that you do your best to honor those pronouns. I mean, I have to say that even yesterday, it's hard because you don't want to mess up people's pronouns. Sometimes your brain is trying to catch up with the pronouns. But even yesterday, I had met a young person who had identified earlier to me as someone who was transitioning. And what I mean by that is that they were a girl on their birth certificate, and they identify as a man now, and they are taking hormones to become a man. And so I thought I was so slick, and I quickly used the pronoun he, and I was quickly corrected that person identifies as they. And I felt, even like I'm in the middle of this all, every day, and I felt badly. I felt badly that I said their pronoun wrong, and I just had to reassure myself, it's okay, you can't get it all right, and you shouldn't have made that assumption. But now you know, and that's good that they've told you, and just do your best with it. So, that's what I would say with androgynous, and I'd also really recommend that you ask them what pronoun they're using. Recently I did a workshop where honestly, everybody, it was a queer writing workshop, and everybody over 30 was using he or she, maybe not in the ways you would anticipate, but they were using he or she, and everybody under 30 was using they. So I think it's a generational issue as well. Let's see, what do we have? You have, is non-binary the same as gender fluid? I'm hearing that term more lately. Um, I don't think necessarily, because non-binary, they are opting out of the male-female duality, but they could feel that their gender is fairly, consistent, right? That, maybe they were tomboyish and they've always been tomboyish, and that's, and they're using the word non-binary to describe that existence, but it doesn't really move around a lot. Whereas gender fluid, again, everybody's using these words a bit differently. I keep having to say this because I don't want to get you in trouble. But um, gender fluid, I think, really speaks to the idea of that we are not necessarily consistent with our gender, that some days we have more feminine days, some days we have more masculine days, um, and not just days, but maybe years. There's, definitely times in your life where, I showed you the pictures of me, from age 16 to 20, I was really trying to be more feminine, and then since then I really kind of feel consistent in being masculine. So gender fluid basically acknowledges that we're not kind of stuck in our genders, that there's room to play and move and try, experiment, etc. Oh, and queer writing we use they. So there's been a lot. If you're interested in this issue of the they pronoun, there's a U of T professor that said he wouldn't use it, which I'm sorry that is the big story that made the news. However, as what often happens when an exclusionary practice is put out there were a lot of beautiful and smart responses to it. So if you want to read about why people are using it, you could look up that story and see the responses. Okay, I think we're through the questions, unless I missed any. I just wanted to give you a sense of what's happening in the schools. And one of the reasons I know that you're working post-secondary, but one of the reasons I thought it was valuable to show you just a few of these stats is because I think in post-secondary context, I see this. There's this idea, well, we live in Canada, we got gay marriage, so things are going pretty good for the gays here, and, how much work do we really need to do, and what I have found is that, and not just me, but National Climate has found, is that, in fact, I would say our secondary and primary schooling are probably one of the most homophobic experiences that people in Canada will have, homophobic and transphobic. So when you're getting your students, and I assume there are many different ages, but if their only experience with schooling has been primary and secondary, then they have lived through a lot of homophobia. And so by the time even that, we get students at Trent, we think, oh, Trent is gay friendly, they're going to be fine, we don't need to give them extra support. But I find the opposite. They are desperately craving people to talk to, professors to, be okay with these identities, professors to be role models, to be out, to this thing has been happening lately. I have two stepkids who are now in university, and many of their friends identify as queer. And I didn't even realize this. They've been asking our kids, what are your moms like? Like, what do they do? Because we're lesbian moms. They say, what do like, how do they make lives for themselves? Can you grow up and be queer? Can you make a family? Can you have jobs? Is this going to work? So a lot of people at that age have just been through I'm not saying all schools. Some schools are great. Some schools have the GSAs and they're working hard on this. But a lot of schools still, they just know this as a bad experience. So, and here we go. 70% of all participating students, both LGBTQ and non-LGBTQ, reported hearing expressions such as "that's so gay" every day in school. Every day in school. And I know that probably some of you are going to tell me, and I hear this all the time, well, they're not really talking about, you know, gay sexuality. They're just saying, that book is dumb, or, I don't like that musician. And I think that's true. I don't think they are often explicitly trying to hurt gay people. But when you hear that every day at school, and the term is referencing something in a negative way, it's never in a positive way, it it hurts you. Like it's a little cut at you every day. So how, if they do feel that they're gay, are they possibly going to feel okay about themselves? Especially when those comments are often unchecked. And then, half reported hearing worse stuff. Yeah, you can read that. The levels of physical harassment or assault are still really high. I think this is important for you too because a lot of queer students drop out of school or don't feel that school welcomes them. They don't feel safe there, and I'm sure that many of you have those students in your classes. The other group that's targeted are kids with queer parents. And I could say that for both of my kids, my older kids, my younger kids too young to have gotten this yet, but I'm sure it's coming. Both of my older kids, even though they went to very progressive downtown Toronto schools, got tons of crap for having lesbian moms. The boy ended up in fistfights, and the girl ended up having to do, I feel like, the homophobia training at her school. So that's another group that often identifies heterosexual, but because of their parents are targeted. This is the one that's probably the most disturbing to our group as educators, is that many of the kids hear these comments from teachers. I guess they're saying 10%. So maybe it's not many of the kids, but look at how frequently they hear them. So it's like if you have that teacher, then you're hearing it on a somewhat consistent basis. And again, I see this with my own kids as well. Okay, I just thought those were the numbers, but I like to always give some examples with voices. I did research in the schools. I worked with about 600 kids ages 8 to 18. And I tried to pick more of the older kids so that you'd have a better idea where they're at. I mean, they're closer in age to your students. So again, experiences can be positive or negative, but there's a lot of misconceptions out there. So this was a kid, and she raised her hand in the middle of class. I remember this, and she said, I have a question. I said, yeah. And she said, well, I really like to wear pink. I said, yeah. She said, well, but I like girls. Yeah. Is it okay if I wear pink and still like girls? Can I get girls? I said, for sure, absolutely. So you never know what stereotypes and what rules they're being told. And she writes, Dear Mom and Dad, this is the way I am. I am bisexual. I love my sexual, and I'm fine with it. I am also a tomboy. I don't like dresses or makeup. I should be able to wear whatever I want or date whoever I want to, and yes, I like to wear pink, but I like pants and running shoes, hair short, with gel. I like to hang out with guys. I don't like to paint my nails. I like school, and I want to be a chef. I want you to accept that. I think it's a beautiful piece. It's so She has such pride in her and who she is and what she wants to do in the world. And I also wanted to show you these examples as writing teachers because um, I'm not showing you the original piece of writing because you wouldn't be able to read it. She really, really struggled with getting her writing on the page, but I was just a guest speaker. She didn't have to do this. It wasn't for a grade or anything, and yet she tried so hard to write this because she was so proud of her identity. So often writing about gender and sexuality or any kind of marginalized identity um, is real motivation for students who struggle with writing to put their words on the page. This is another example I wanted to show you. This kid is younger. He's grade 5. But this is the way intersectionality works at times. And this kid was holding, this was anonymous writing. He was holding a series of Post-its in his hands, and he didn't want to put them up on the board with all the other kids. But we kind of said, well, what do you got there? And he was an Asian kid, and he's in a rural area. And each line is a new Post-it. So he says, people don't let me play and don't pass and keeps calling me like I'm a girl just because I'm from other country. People leave me out because I'm new kid and from other country. If boys and girls don't need to be called, why separate washrooms? What can you do to get people to stop bullying? Someone said, suck it, and then said, wait, you have nothing there to me. People keep bullying me because I'm from other country. What do you do if people leave you out and call you names? People pushes me and call me names. So again, he felt passionate about writing these pieces. He had a story that was really important to tell. I find his words excruciating, painful, and yet, I find them painful because of the racism and the homophobia and the sexism all mixed together. He did not necessarily identify as queer in any way. It was his Asian masculinity that was being questioned, because he was an Asian boy, and his masculinity didn't look like his white boy rural counterparts. He was being called a girl. So they targeted him with gender, but as an immigrant. Does that make sense? And so he's getting a double whammy hit at him. And that's the part that's really painful. But the part that I find really hopeful and powerful is that nowhere in this does he think anything is wrong with him. He really thinks what's wrong is this bullying. Even so far as to say, why are they doing these separate bathrooms? Like, why can't kids just go to the bathroom? I mean, he has a systemic analysis. He says it's not fair that they're treating me this way, and he's trying to figure out how to get a change in the system. He doesn't feel like anything's wrong with him, right? In fact, in that class afterwards, there was another kid who had written on another, piece of paper that he wanted to kill himself. And it turned out, and these are grade 5 students, and it turned out that kid that wanted to kill himself was the one that was the head bullier of this kid, which we do often hear that. But that class, I think, afterwards had a very transformative discussion, and the teacher worked really well with them to try to get them to acknowledge that this was not okay and to get them to knock it off. But there's, I try to give you a range of positive and kind of negative and everything in between. So this was another experience, and this was a girl, she said to me on the side, she said, well, I look like a boy, but, I kind of like that because I like the way the girls like me for it. And I said, okay. And she said, can I draw pictures about that? And I said, sure. And so she created this, and she was very happy. And she says, I'm a girl. And then they say he's cute. And she was really proud that she pulled off looking like a boy, and that for that reason she was attractive to a lot of the girls. And it was fun. It was happy, and you know, um, I'm sure, as you know, being able to let students mix images and writing is also another really powerful strategy in literacy education. This is a kid that I was most worried about, and probably why I did this study, but I don't know who he was. He says, my past is a part of me. This is because of how I acted as a toddler and how it affected me throughout every year of school. As a child, I played with lots of toys, some mine, some my sister's. I would play with toy cars and Barbie dolls with my little brother and my older sister. Because of this, I had no social identity for if I acted like a boy or acted like a girl. This is what led to my childhood depression that I am continuing to fight. During my first year of public school, I was made fun of for the way I acted because I would always talk to the girls and not the guys. I was called rude names and was even labeled gay during my last year at that school. In 2005, I moved to Ontario hoping to get a fresh start, but failed at doing so, which ultimately led to my past issues coming back even worse. So this is the kid that I'm worried about, and because he's really internalized all of the hurt and the hatred being leveled against him for perceived gender and perceived sexuality. Um, I've known a lot of these kids that ultimately leave school, and as I said, I would bet that you see a lot of them in your work. And maybe when they're working with you, it's the first opportunity that they have to write about these experiences. Here's a happier kid. He says, even if I'm a boy, I can whip my hair back and forth. Again, this was the time of Justin Bieber at the height, and there was a lot of pride in playing with gender. And I would say with the boys, the long hair was the #1 way that they were being targeted for not being proper boys. But he's claiming it. I realize we don't have too much time left. I'll give you this one because this is the most hopeful one. The object I would choose is my flowered jeans because I normally don't like jeans, but these I thought were different because all along the side of the legs there are rows of string that end up being stems of flowers that are blooming. These jeans make me feel happy because they represent the sort of feminine side to me and at the same time show my masculine side. They also make me feel like I'm a part of a large force that stands up to bullying and criticism, to express themselves and to show the world that our lives have meaning. Continues. If somebody were to tell me that I couldn't wear my favorite jeans, I would stand up to everything they're trying to criticize and tell them that they had no say in what I wear and certainly have no say in what I believe in. When people see me, they might ask me what I have on my leg, and I would clearly say and explain what it was. And it's a horrible thing that I noticed them mocking me about it, but if I were a girl, they still might ask me, but they wouldn't care because to them it would be okay. In my point of view, everybody should have the right to express who they are as a whole and not have to hide a very important part of who they are. Everybody should just live their lives the way they want to, and people should leave them. So I just love that one because he's so powerful. I wish he was running the United States, I think, right now, among other things, because he doesn't feel badly about himself, and he wants to kind of bring this pride to protect all of us. I see I only have 3 minutes left. And I have many tips for you, but they're going to be on the resource page as well. I also just want to note, and this is here as well, that again, that sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression are protected grounds of the Human Rights Code. I know that part of your job is to prepare your students for the workplace, and if they don't know to not be homophobic, to know that they are not allowed to say these hurtful things, then they could end up going to the workplace and getting thrown out or breaking the law. So I think you can legitimately put it in there like this is an important part of what you need to know to be able to enter the workforce. I just have my idea with safety, that this is a safer way to behave. And I just want to go to the end really quickly. I'm sorry, I'm going past the polls and the
And
tips, but just to
Carleen,
give you a couple
do
of
know that
examples.
we're not going to cut you off. If you would like to continue to speak, probably
Okay.
some of our audience will be able to stay, but we certainly respect the fact that many of you have other things that you have to go on to, and we will send the resources. But please continue, Carleen.
Okay, so for the people that are leaving, maybe I'll just show the two, a couple of assignment lesson ideas I had that you might want to use, or or maybe give you an idea how to create your own, and then maybe we could go back to the polls and the tips. So this was a writing exercise I used in my research, and I noticed, I believe it would fulfill your requirement that I took from your handbook, your curriculum document B2.1. Write brief text to convey simple ideas and factual information. And when they wrote about their flowered jeans or, um, I can't remember what other examples I gave you. It was a response to this writing activity. It's a very easy writing activity where they pick something that they feel represents their gender and they describe it and talk about how it makes them feel. And I found even for the young people who were really struggling with writing, they did this exercise. They felt very motivated from all different gender backgrounds, like queer and not queer. So I recommend it. People don't usually have a chance to write about their gender. If you're trying to get them motivated in literacy, this is a useful activity. The other thing is there's examples all the time, Um, you don't have to it's not rocket science, right? You don't have to invent the wheel on these bringing in queer material, but right now you have Best Picture, Moonlight won Best Picture, so you could just pick any number of reviews. I just at random picked Wikipedia and have students interpret the information on the website, or print it off and have them read the text and connect ideas. And in that way, the subject matter is about what does it mean to be black and to deal with poverty and to identify as gay, and how does that feel and how did they portray it. And you're doing all of this work and you're fulfilling your curriculum. So that's just another little example. So I should go back, maybe I should go back to the polls then and see, because the polls might help me understand what you might be interested in knowing more about. So I am wondering about this. Have you already provided this content in your lessons? Okay, so news and current events. That was kind of like my moonlight angle. Okay. So that gives us a set. They're still moving around a bit. Maybe I'll just give them a second more. So we still have quite a bit of people that have not included materials, and I would say that that's probably pretty common. But not after today. Today you will feel empowered, right? To don't answer that yet. Let's see. To include material. I think often in educational settings we are taught to not acknowledge our bodies, in any way. So we don't often get to hear about gender or sexuality. But it doesn't need to be that way, and you can change that. Let me look at the next poll is about maybe what's holding you back. Because if we can look at what's holding you back, or whether you're feeling open with doing this work, then maybe we could have some direction on this conversation. Right. I move it around. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. So, one thing I would say about not knowing enough about the topic is I think it's probably related to the fear of saying the wrong thing or the offending. Because I feel like as educators, we often have to plunge in and do our best, and we don't necessarily know enough about the topic, but we have to go forward anyway. But there's something particular about this topic that makes it scarier, that you might not feel like you want to go out on a wing with this. And I guess my first tip, I think I have it on the next page, but I just want to look at this for a moment, is that I think humility is really important in the teaching around these topics. To say, like, hey, I didn't, the way I started this talk, like, I didn't know everything about this. I'm still learning about these topics. I'm still getting pronouns wrong, but I'm trying. If there's it's one of the topics that even the young people might know more about than you, especially if they identify as queer. But that gives them a feeling of confidence too, to be able to teach you, and often that's really good in learning and like literacy and basic skills, if they can teach you something. So I think if you just kind of recognize that you don't know enough, and share that, and kind of say that you're wanting to learn, I think it's okay. I think it's okay. And there are also, I would say, in that, like, a lot of good resources, a lot of good books and movies and all kinds of materials, lesson plans out there that you can draw on so that you become more knowledgeable. The other thing is just to get, when you're getting books and movies, you're getting queer voices there, so you don't have to represent those queer voices. You could say, okay, well, we're reading this gay young adult book, and what does that person say about their life? So they get to be the expert. You're just bringing that voice into the classroom. The same thing with, I do not know the right answers. I would just recommend saying, yeah, I don't know the right answer to this, but I can look it up. I can find it. Maybe we can look it up together, and it could be part of the, like, digital literacy component of your program. We don't know the answers. How can we find them? Right? So because, like, as I said earlier, I think marginalized identities are really powerful motivators for learning. And because they are so, they can really be the hook for your lesson. Like, the not knowing and the not having the right answers might be the precise hook that gets the work going. So we have 30% people feeling, or of the 13, saying that they feel very confident doing so. So that's great. I hope I've offered something for you. Is it appropriate? I'm not sure if it's appropriate. And that's tied to, like, worrying about offending someone. I think that's probably. I think that probably people disagree on that topic of whether it's appropriate. I think what is, like, actually speaking about somebody's sexuality, maybe it's not appropriate. Maybe somebody wants to share, maybe they don't. Maybe you're worried about where that conversation would go. Okay, it's tricky. It could go in a really good place and motivate learning, or it could get weird. Fair enough. But what I think would always be okay and appropriate is to talk about the human rights aspect of this issue. Because, as I said, it is part of Canadian culture. It is part of our diverse population, and it is part of the law. So, like you can think about your personality and what kinds of angles you want to take on these issues. But even if you're, really nervous about it or scared, you could always bring it up, in terms of the law, or or like, Oscar Best Picture. I mean, that's pretty neutral. I don't think that's going to get you into any weird places or places that would be upsetting. If you're worried that you might offend someone, I think that we are going to offend people, and by not saying anything, we could just as easily offend someone. So, in that one, if you could just go, well, any way I do it, I might offend someone, so I might as well go ahead and give it a try. I think if you could take that approach, maybe it might relieve some fears, right? Like, you could just as easily offend someone by never bringing up these issues. For example, I work with literacy tutors, and I had one tutor that was working out in the high schools with the kids, and one of the boys got really angry one day. I mean, not angry in a mean way or anything, but he said, "Come here," and he had my student, who was his tutor, following him to the library, and he finds this one small corner of the library, and he finds the 5 books in the library that have any gay content, and he says, how come none of the teachers, none of the tutors ever let me read this? They think I'm a boy, I'm a masculine boy, so all I want to do is read about cars. I've been in school for 12 years, and the only thing they give me is cars, and I want to read about the gay stuff. Why won't anybody do that? And so, in fact, by not saying anything all those years, he felt very offended and very, desperate for some representation. And that desperation, that hunger for representation, can really hurt. So, I'd say don't worry so much about offending someone. Try to proceed with, a good heart and as much knowledge as you can gather. Okay. That's the tip number 1. Approach with humility. I think humility is really important. Don't be the expert. Be the person who's learning alongside your students. It's just good teaching anyway. Include queer content in the curriculum. I would say this is a big issue. People think, okay, well, I'm going to be ready. As soon as somebody says fag, I have my line that I'm going to say. And that's just reactive teaching. I think a stronger teaching approach is to make sure that in whatever content you're using, you have diverse representation. The other thing I would say is don't let these jokes or that's so gay just go unchecked or unchallenged. When you don't say anything, even though if they think you're kind of a jerk or kind of a letdown if you're challenging them when they say it, if you don't say anything, then people learn that it's just okay to say those issues. And if one of those students comes out a few years later, they're going to think you don't like them because you were fine with everybody putting down gay people. So, like, maybe it's bad that they're gay, right? Like, you don't know what that damage is when those things go unchecked. I'm not sure exactly what you're using in your curriculum, but if you're using famous people that are queer, I would say include their sexual orientation or their gender identity in their autobiographical information. I know sometimes people, well, you can't, guarantee that a role model will help people. That's true. You cannot guarantee that, but it couldn't hurt. And I mean, for instance, everybody in this country probably has to take Shakespeare at some point, and he wrote love poetry to both men and women. And until I got to university, nobody ever told me that. Like, to think, maybe if he was around right now, he would be using the term bisexual. To know that such an honored writer, such an important person in the canon in Canada is bisexual, that would mean a lot to kids. Well, you have all ages. That would mean a lot to adults as well. Michelangelo, Alan Turing, Sally Ride, Mark Tewksbury. There's a few more. Include that. Why not? You know, they often include in people's autobiography who they're married to, so why not include their sexuality? Put together some kind of workshop for your faculty and students. Maybe you don't know how to do that. That's okay. Why don't you find a guest speaker? They found me today. Like, we're out there, we're around. Um, try it yourself or bring somebody in. Find literary and visual representations of queer people and culture in your classroom. I cannot say enough how important representation is. When I grew up, I am from Los Angeles. I came here as an adult, and where I grew up, like my background is Mexican American and white, and 70% of the kids were Mexican where I grew up, and only one teacher did I ever have that was Latina. Everybody else was white, and we never read a single thing by someone that wasn't white. In all of my schooling, and that demolishes people. I mean, we know that from the way First Nations culture has been demolished in Canada. If you don't give people representation, it really hurts. It really hurts their imaginations, their ability to thrive. So the same thing happens for queers. And you know what? If they're not queer, it's still useful for any of your students to keep learning about, the diverse population that we live with. Let's see. I don't know exactly how you teach, if it's more in isolation or if you have colleagues around, but I think it's always helpful to make friends with other faculty or administration or staff or whoever you're working with, and to bond on bringing in social justice and equity. I would imagine in your work that social justice and equity is a key part of it. But it's always good to have backup, right? If you're doing it on your own and you ever get questioned, and then you don't have anyone to stand by you, you can't be as strong. Oh, I just also wanted to note that, when issues of gender and sexuality come in, people often laugh. And sometimes the laughing is to be mean, but often it's because they're nervous. So, just to watch that carefully, because if they're nervous and there's a way of kind of acknowledging that and bringing people together, then they might be more willing to participate than just kind of simply say, laughing is inappropriate, this is a serious matter, that might shut people down. And then the last tip I just had was using case studies, examples, scenarios in your work. Those could be things that they're writing, those could be things they're interpreting. I think that would fit into many of your curriculum expectations. Oh, let me see. Are there more comments?
Yeah, there's been some examples of some folks that might be names people recognize in this audience from NIDA, Virginia Woolf and Kent Monkman, for instance.
Right. Were there any other questions? Oh, I see. We could use that activity. Yeah, you could definitely use this activity in creative writing. I'm all about the creative writing. Oh, okay. Well, you're welcome, Danielle. I guess she's gone. See, now I'm seeing these questions. Oh, that's great. Oneida says someone could also feel centered out. Yeah, I think that's a really big issue. I just think, I mean, you just really need to strive to say, this is the topic we're, working on today, and, this is what I'm thinking, and bring all these opinions in, and not do that thing, what I'm sure you all know, but it still happens a lot, of, well, you know about this, Fred, tell us what your experience has been, right? So you never do that. You never do that kind of thing, right? You don't force people to become experts if they don't want to be. Now, sometimes they really want to be, and it's opportunity for them to have a voice in the class. So you just have to watch that. Yeah, Virginia Woolf, Kent Monkman. I think Kent Monkman is fantastic. I put an image of his at the beginning, and his exhibit in U of T just closed in the University of Toronto. But you can go to his website and see all of his beautiful pictures, and he really turns First Nations and colonialism and fine art upside down, and he'll make you think differently about the world. I mean, I would say take one of his pictures and create an assignment around it, because every probably age and background would be interested in that. Okay. Well, Sarah, what do you think?
You've done a fantastic job. Carleen had also sent us uh, the tip sheet in a handout. I will be distributing this when I send the recording link and Carleen's presentation, but some of you might be able to download it now by clicking on the blue link that you see on the screen. So if you want to take a moment to get that, please go ahead. And otherwise, Carleen, thank you so much for giving so generously of your time and your heart, and your experience as someone living with both the ignorance and prejudice and understanding the need we all have to understand better and to know how to communicate with each other in ways that aren't hurtful and can bring us together. We really have enjoyed listening to you and having this opportunity.
Well, thanks, Sarah, and thank you all for spending this time with me today. I really appreciate that you have the interest and that you're working with these uh, people who are struggling in many ways, and this could be one crucial piece of their identity and their learning and their ability to kind of thrive in the world. So it's great. I'm glad to spend the time with you all.
Okay, well, thank you, and I'm just going to go back to the end of your presentation. I don't know, Carleen, if it's appropriate to invite people to send any final questions or queries to me that I could relay to you, but I'm certainly willing to do that.
Sure, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Everybody's saying thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome. It's been, yeah, it's been lovely. It's my first webinar, so there we go. Hopefully I was helpful to you.
You
Oh,
did a fantastic job. Thank you. So I'm going to stop the recording, and those of you who are still here, we appreciate you hanging on and listening and seeing all of the other ideas and resources that Carleen has prepared for you. Again, I will be circulating everything to you shortly, at least before the end of the day today. And we thank you for participating this morning. So when you're ready, you can click on the exit that you see in the upper right-hand portion of your screen.
okay.
And Carleen, I will publish the recording.
And I do that publish when presenter exits. Okay. Okay, I'll do exit now. Thanks so much, Sarah.
Okay, thanks,
All right.
Carleen. Take care. Bye.
Ciao.